The party was in full swing when my phone vibrated in my bag. The environment around me was a mix of laughter, loud music, and the clinking of crystal glasses. I was surrounded by friends and acquaintances, all immersed in the glamorous atmosphere of my father's mansion in Los Angeles. But when I looked at my phone screen, my world crumbled in an instant. The message was simple, but it carried an unbearable weight. "You are not safe. Be careful." My heart raced, and the background music turned into a distant hum. I tried to compose myself, but the feeling of being watched settled in. The looks of laughter and smiles around me turned into shadows. With trembling hands, I put the phone away and looked around, trying to identify someone who might be watching. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. The walls were adorned with mirrors, reflecting my pale face and wide eyes. "Calm down, Sophie," I murmured to myself, trying to stave off the panic. What did this mean? Who could be behind such a threatening message? When I finally managed to leave the bathroom, I found my father in the living room. His expression grave, almost somber. He pulled me aside, away from curious eyes. "Sophie, we need to talk." His voice was low but firm. "I received some disturbing information. You need protection." "Protection? From what, Dad?" I was confused, trying to understand the gravity of the situation. "They're just threats, it's nothing." "It's not just that. I hired a bodyguard." He hesitated before continuing. "He's ex-military and will be with you from now on." Before I could protest, Nate appeared. He was an imposing man, with muscles evident under his black shirt and an expression that conveyed security, but also an intensity that made me nervous. His piercing gaze seemed to evaluate my every move, making me feel vulnerable. "Hello, Sophie," he said, his voice deep, with a seriousness in his tone. "Hi," I responded, trying to hide how uncomfortable the situation made me. "Do you really think I need protection?" "I'm not here to discuss that. I'm here to protect you," he replied, maintaining his authoritative tone. His look seemed to say there was no room for refusal. I was filled with a mix of admiration and resistance. Who did he think he was? I decided to ignore him and went back to the party, but I couldn't shake Nate's presence. He was always a few steps away, like a constant shadow. The music continued to play, but my heart didn't follow the rhythm. Suddenly, a paparazzo invaded the space, his cameras flashing like lasers. I shrank back, trying to hide behind a group of friends. Nate moved quickly, intercepting the photographer before he could get too close. In a swift movement, he pushed him away, his expression impassive, but his eyes gleaming with fierce determination. "Leave. You do not have permission to take photos," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. I watched in silence, a wave of admiration washing over me. For a brief moment, the fear that had been chasing me was replaced by undeniable respect for his skill and courage. At the same time, confusion overwhelmed me. How could I feel this way about someone who was there just to protect me? I didn't want to be seen as a fragile damsel in distress, but Nate seemed to challenge that view. As the party continued, I tried to distract myself, but his presence was constant, and the conflicting emotions within me kept growing. "You're very protective," I managed to say to Nate when we found a moment alone, away from the commotion. "It's my job," he replied, but there was something in his tone that made me question if that was all he felt. The tension between us was palpable, like a thread about to snap. And, at that moment, I realized that the protection he offered might just be the beginning of something much more complicated. The morning sun filtered through my bedroom curtains, creating lines of light that danced softly on the wooden floor. I stretched, feeling the tension from the previous day still present in my body. The threatening messages I received during the luxurious party still pounded in my mind. What should have been a night of celebration turned into a spiral of fear and uncertainty. I went downstairs to the kitchen, where my father was already sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in hand. He looked older than ever, worry lines marking his face. "Good morning, Sophie," he said, but his gaze was distant, lost in thought. Today, Nate will be with you in all your activities. Great, I responded with a sarcastic tone I couldn't control. I can't wait to have a stranger following me like a shadow. My father sighed, making it clear that the situation was more serious than I cared to admit. As soon as I finished my coffee, it didn't take long for Nate to arrive. He was standing at the entrance of the house, arms crossed and a firm look on his face. "Ready for the day?" he asked, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know if I should feel safe or annoyed by his presence. "Ready to be followed, you mean?" I retorted, trying to hide the vulnerability he awakened in me. He simply raised an eyebrow, unfazed by my provocations. "It's my job. Shall we?" The drive to school was filled with awkward silence. Nate drove attentively, his expression unchanging. I looked out the window, trying to distract myself with the Los Angeles scenery, but everything seemed grayer than usual. Upon arrival, I was met with curious looks from my classmates. It was as if everyone knew something was wrong, that my life had changed drastically. Nate walked me to the classroom door and stayed there like a silent guard. While the teacher talked about literature, I could barely pay attention. The worry about the threats and Nate's constant presence distracted me. During the break, I decided to take a walk in the park near the school, and to my surprise, Nate followed closely. As we walked, the atmosphere around us was tense. "You don't need to follow me all the time," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Actually, I do," Nate replied, keeping his eyes fixed ahead. "You are under threat, Sophie. It's not a choice." "Sure, because you're the big hero, right?" My voice dripped with irony, but deep down I knew he was right. It was hard to accept, but there was something comforting about his presence. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. I looked to the side and saw a group of boys approaching, laughing and pushing each other. One of them, seemingly without thinking twice, came towards me, and my heart raced. Nate moved like lightning, positioning himself between me and the group. "Leave," he said with a firm but calm voice. The boys hesitated, realizing they weren't dealing with just anyone. They retreated, but not before I felt adrenaline rush through my body. "Thank you," I murmured, still unsure how to react. Nate turned to me, and his gaze was loaded with an intensity one had never seen before. "I can't let anything happen to you. It's what I do." The tension between us was palpable. Part of me wanted to thank him, but another part wanted to shout that I wasn't a child, that I didn't need protection. The day passed in a blur, and by the end of the class, I was exhausted. I decided to open up to Nate, but when I tried, he pulled away, as if there was an invisible line between us. "Sophie, we can't mix this up," he said, his voice firm, but there was a weakness in his gaze that frustrated me. "My job is to protect you, and I can't get emotionally involved." "But I am more than just a task to you," I protested, feeling indignation take over me. "I am a person. I can't live like this, like a prisoner." He took a deep breath, looking at the floor. "I know, but it's the only way to ensure your safety. Please trust me." At that moment, I realized that behind the mask of hardness, there was a man who genuinely cared. But the frustration within me did not dissipate. I was lost in a whirlwind of emotions, and the internal struggle between the desire for freedom and the need for protection only grew stronger. I was nervous. The family dinner should have been a moment of unity, but the tension in the air was palpable. My father sat at the head of the table, his austere expression reflecting the worry consuming him. He was more focused on protecting me than on hearing about my days, and that made me feel distressed. I looked at Nate, who was standing near the door, his watchful eyes fixed on me. He seemed so distant, as if an invisible line separated us. "You haven't eaten anything, Sophie," my father said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We need to make sure you're strong. Safety is our priority now." "I understand, Dad. But that doesn't mean I don't have feelings or that I can't have a peaceful dinner like anyone else," I responded, trying not to let my frustration show. "I just want what's best for you," he insisted. But the truth was that his words sounded more like a command than genuine concern. The table was elegantly set, but I couldn't appreciate the food. All I really wanted was to feel heard. After dinner, I decided I needed some fresh air. I went out to the garden, where the stars shone intensely. The night breeze was refreshing and made me feel a bit lighter. Nate appeared behind me, his silence bringing an unexpected sense of security. "Are you okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I replied, looking at the sky. "It's like I'm stuck between two lives, the one my father wants and the one I really want. It's hard when others' expectations weigh on you," Nate said, sitting beside me. "I've been through that too." "You? How so?" I looked at him, curious. When I was in the army, the pressure to be perfect was constant. I had to always be alert, always in control. But deep down, I just wanted to come home and be myself, he revealed, his distant gaze lost in memories. "And did you manage that?" I asked, feeling a growing connection between us. "In parts. I learned that life is more than obligations and expectations. It's about who you are and what you truly value," Nate replied, and his words resonated with me. His vulnerability made me feel closer. "And what do you value, Nate?" My curiosity led me to ask. "Protecting the people I love. And somehow you've become one of them," he said, and I felt a warmth rise to my face. I don't know what I feel," I confessed, my voice almost a whisper. "I feel like I'm falling for you, but at the same time, this is so complicated." "You don't need to feel pressured, Sophie. I'm here to protect you, and that's all we should focus on right now," he said, but there was a tone of sadness in his voice. "It's not just about that, Nate. I want more. I want to understand you and what's happening between us," I insisted, but he just shook his head, as if he wanted to avoid the subject. The night continued, and the connection seemed palpable, but the barrier Nate had erected was becoming a weight on my heart. What we were building seemed so fragile, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like if it all ended. Then the unexpected happened. A message on my phone made my heart race. "Be careful who you trust," said the anonymous message. My body froze. Fear surged like a wave, and I knew the situation was about to get even more dangerous. "Is something wrong?" Nate asked, his gaze immediately becoming sharp. "I received another message," I said, my voice trembling. "It's a threat." He quickly stood up, his expression transforming into determination. "Let's go. We need to get out of here. Now." My stomach turned. I wanted to protest, but at the same time I knew he was right. The connection between us was growing, but the danger was also closing in. And as we ran away from the safety I knew, I realized there was no turning back. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the aroma of coffee enveloped me as I entered the shelter. It was a small space, windowless but equipped with essentials. Nate was there, standing like a rock, arms crossed and with the expression of someone who could face an army. The silence between us was heavy and loaded with tension. I knew that what had just happened between us would change everything, but the reality of the situation surrounded us, and the adrenaline still pulsed in my veins. "We need to move," said Nate, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, but there was a weakness behind it that I had never noticed before. "If they find us here, we won't have anywhere to run." I nodded, but my mind was spinning around the kiss we had just shared. It was something I had dreamed of, but never imagined would happen in such a chaotic moment. "Nate." "About what happened?" "No." He turned, interrupting me. "We can't mix this with what we are facing. You need to understand that my priority is your safety. And you think that makes me feel safe?" I felt frustrated. How could he be so distant and yet so close? "You are the only one who can protect me, but you're also the only one who makes my heart race." He sighed, his expression softening for a brief moment. "Sophie, it's not safe for us to let ourselves go. We need to be rational." I wanted to scream, but instead I let out a resigned sigh. "All right, let's move." As we headed for the exit, the environment became increasingly heavy. The shelter was not just a physical space. It was a symbol of everything we were going through. Every step we took was a reminder of what could happen if we failed. When we left, the night was dark, and the only light came from the moon, illuminating our path. "Nate, you have no idea who is after us, do you?" I asked, trying to break the ice that had formed between us since the kiss. "No, but I'm prepared for anything." He remained alert, his posture rigid and senses sharp. "And you should be too." Adrenaline rushed through me as he looked around, like a predator searching for its prey. But suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind us. My heart raced. "Nate!" He quickly turned, his gaze becoming a sharp blade. "Run!" The command left his lips like a military order, and I didn't hesitate. I ran as fast as I could, feeling the pressure of imminent danger. Nate was right behind me, his imposing presence assuring me that no matter what happened, he would protect me. The sound of footsteps grew closer, and fear began to settle in my chest. Whatever was chasing us was not playing games. "Go down that alley," Nate shouted, pointing to a narrow passage. Without thinking twice, I entered, my breath echoing off the concrete walls. The darkness seemed to engulf me, but I felt Nate close, his presence a beacon in the storm. Adrenaline made my body react, and before I realized it, he was already fighting two men. It was a scene straight out of an action movie, and I stood paralyzed for a moment, admiring his bravery. He moved like a shadow, agile and strong, while I tried to find a way to help. "Stay behind me, Sophie." His voice was firm, and I realized he was so focused he didn't notice how I felt. I wanted to be strong, but seeing him fight was making me dizzy. Finally, Nate managed to knock down one of the men and, with a quick move, turned to the other. In an instant, everything was silent again. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the moment of calm was fleeting. "Let's go, we need to get out of here," he said, pulling me by the arm. I followed him, still in shock at what had just happened. The adrenaline still pulsed through me, and the feeling of being alive and protected was intense. When we arrived at a hotel, Nate took me to a room where the light was soft and welcoming. The air was loaded with palpable tension, and I knew the chemistry between us had reached its peak. But at the same time, his insecurity about not being able to protect me outweighed any desire I might feel. He turned to me, his eyes dark and deep. "Sophie, I can't let this happen again. And what if it means we can never be together?" I asked, my voice trembling. The fear of losing him was real, and the idea that our feelings could be severed by his need to protect me was distressing. He hesitated, and I could see an internal battle unfolding in his eyes. "I just want you to be safe. That's all that matters right now." And in that moment, I realized that, even amid the chaos, what I wanted most was to be by his side. The tension was unbearable. I looked out the hotel room window, the city of Los Angeles stretching before me like a sea of lights. It was beautiful, but to me, each light was a reminder of the danger surrounding me. Nate stood by the door, his gaze fixed on me, but there was something different in his demeanor. It was a mix of concern and determination that made me uneasy. "Sophie, we need to talk," he said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. I turned, feeling my heart race. There was something in his tone that made me nervous. What was he going to say? I knew the situation was intensifying, but I wasn't ready for what was about to happen. "You can't go on like this," he continued, crossing his arms. "We can't ignore the threats. I'm starting to suspect that your father might be involved in this." I felt my stomach churn. What did he mean, my father? He had always been my protector, my safe haven. I couldn't imagine that he could have anything to do with the threatening messages that haunted me. "Are you saying my father is behind all this?" I asked, my voice trembling with indignation. "That's absurd, Nate. I'm not saying anything for sure, Sophie, but you need to open your eyes. Things aren't as simple as they seem. And you think I don't see that?" I retorted, anger mingling with fear. "Do you really think I don't know my father? He would never do something like this." Nate took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. He was clearly frustrated, and I could see the internal struggle he was facing. I knew he cared about me, but I also knew he was trying to protect both of us from a painful truth. "I just want you to be safe," he replied, calmer but still firm. "And if that means confronting your father, then we need to do that." His words hung heavy in the air, and I stepped back, feeling an urgent need to process everything. I needed some time alone. "You don't trust me," I said, the pain evident in my voice. "This isn't about trust, Sophie," he responded, raising his voice. "It's about your safety. Life isn't a fairy tale, and I need to do whatever it takes to protect you." I couldn't bear the tension any longer. With a brusque movement, I left the room and headed for the elevator. I needed air, some space to think. With every step I took, I felt myself drifting away from Nate and from myself. The confusion inside me was growing, and I needed to understand what was happening, not just with the threats but with us as well. But as the elevator doors opened, a strong hand grabbed my arm. I looked up and saw a man I didn't recognize. Fear invaded my body, and before I could scream, he pulled me out of the elevator. "Quiet," he growled, dragging me down the corridor. Desperate, I tried to break free, but it was as if I was trapped in a nightmare. Panic took over, and amid the chaos, I remembered Nate. He was upstairs and I needed help. But the man was dragging me away, and reality began to fade. "Nate!" I screamed, my voice echoing down the corridor. Then everything happened quickly. The man shoved me toward a door, and I fought with all my strength. But desperation turned into a struggle for survival. The last thought that crossed my mind was how much I wished Nate was there, that he could save me as he had so many times before. As the door closed behind me, I realized I was in a much graver situation than I could have imagined. The truth I wanted to avoid was about to be revealed, and I was about to discover that the line between trust and betrayal was thinner than I thought. Adrenaline pulsed through my veins as the darkness around me grew denser. The silence was almost oppressive, and I knew every second counted. The memory of the threats I received haunted me, and the idea of being alone here in an unknown place only increased my fear. But at the same time there was a spark of hope. Nate was out there and I trusted him. While I hid in a dark corner, my mind wandered. What was going through his mind now? Was he looking for me? The image of his serious and determined face calmed me a little. He always displayed a strength I admired. When I finally heard the sound of footsteps, my heart raced. The door creaked open, and the light from a flashlight illuminated the room. My relief was immediate. "Sophie," he called, his voice firm and urgent. "Here," I responded, trying not to let my fragility show. He approached quickly, and when our eyes met, a wave of security washed over me. Nate was there, and I knew he would do anything for me. The tension was palpable in the air, and before I could think of anything else, he threw himself at me, enveloping me in his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, assessing me with his eyes. "Now that you're here, yes." "What happened?" I asked, trying to understand the situation. "They didn't expect me to track you down. We need to get out of here." He looked around, analyzing potential dangers. As he turned toward the door, a deafening noise echoed, and a group of men stormed the place. Nate positioned himself in front of me, his body tense like a drawn bow, ready to act. Adrenaline shot through my body, and I crawled closer to him, seeking protection. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low and controlled. The men began to advance, and Nate didn't hesitate. In an agile movement, he lunged forward, attacking the first man who approached. The clash between them was brutal, and I couldn't look away. Nate's courage left me speechless, and at the same time, filled me with an intense feeling. He was fighting for me. The confrontation unfolded in a choreography of fight and chaos. I could do nothing but watch, but I knew he was protecting me. Every blow Nate delivered was accompanied by a mix of admiration and fear. How could he be so strong and fearless? With a final move, Nate took down the last man, and silence filled the room. "Let's go," he said, pulling me by the hand as we ran out of the building. Freedom was so close, but the tension between us was palpable. As soon as we got out, I looked at Nate, who was now panting but determined. "What happened?" I asked, still trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "They were just pawns. The real person behind the threats is someone much closer than you think," he revealed, his expression grave. My heart sank. What did that mean? The weight of his words hit me hard, but there was no time to think. We needed to get away. As we ran, a new determination grew within me. I couldn't let fear control my life. Nate had risked everything for me, and I needed to show him I was ready to fight too. When we finally found a safe place, away from immediate danger, I looked into his eyes. The intensity of the moment connected us in a way I had never felt before. "Nate, I began, but he interrupted me. "No, Sophie. We can't mix our personal lives with this. You need to understand that my priority is your safety," he said, his voice laden with concern. "I know, but you need to know that I feel something for you," I exclaimed, my frustration evident. "I can't hide behind you forever." He hesitated, and in that moment, I realized that what he feared wasn't just the external danger but also what he felt for me. The tension between us was palpable, and what started as fear was now transforming into something deeper. "We'll deal with this later when all this is over," he replied, his intense eyes locked on mine. I knew the fight wasn't over, but the connection we felt was undeniable. We were together, and that was what mattered.